The tally board read 1944 to 61, and Sable Orenvoss was not looking at the board. This is the record of Threshfell, archivist of the Suri Remnant, Observer Post 4, covering session 1847 of the Settled Compact Deliberation Tier, the session the Orenic Directorate later asked to be removed from the official record. The request was denied. This is why. I was present in the Observer Gallery, 11 rows above the floor platform, the same seat I have used for 27 years. I had my writing tablet open. I had my archive log running. I had watched 1846 sessions before this one and taken notes on every single one, and I had never once in all that time stopped writing mid-sentence to stare at the ceiling. I am getting ahead of myself. That comes later. The chamber at Deliberation Tier 7 is 600 meters across. The floor platform, where member species delegates stand to address the assembly, sits 9 meters below the lowest delegate row. The coldstone they chose for the floor has a specific sound property. Every footstep on it sends a clean echo upward through all 14 tiers of seating. You can hear someone walking to the podium from the moment they leave their chair. You hear their shoes, their weight, the speed of their steps. The Orenic architects who designed this room understood what they were doing. The lighting runs in the cool part of the spectrum, calibrated to Orenic visual range, which makes most other species look flat and pale under it, gray-toned, reduced. It is a room built to tell you where you stand before anyone has said a word. No alarm, no negotiation, no second vote. The expulsion resolution had passed. Apex Arbiter Kroon Vetselar stood at the upper tier reading platform. Orenic delegates are not required to use the floor and read the resolution in the formal bilateral register, both vocal channels open at once. The layered sound filled the chamber from the top down. 3 rows below me, a Kethani observer delegate pressed back into her seat without appearing to notice she had done it. The bilateral resonance does that. It is designed to. Sable Orenvoss stood on the floor platform, 9 meters below everyone, and she was not looking at the tally board. She was looking at the door. The part she planned for 27 years. She never once practiced saying it out loud. Stay close. Kroon Vetselar finished reading. The final line of the expulsion resolution carried the formal compact seal phrase, a 7-syllable sequence in Old Orenic that has closed every expulsion motion in compact history. He had 31 procedural seals on his rank sash, one for each successful expulsion motion he had personally authored. He had reserved space for a 30-second. The chamber was quiet. Sable set her tin cup down on the edge of the floor platform, deliberately. She set it down the way someone sets something down when they know they will be picking it up again shortly. She straightened her collar with both hands, a single practiced adjustment, and then she looked up at 1944 alien faces arranged above her in tiers like a geological feature, and she said 4 words. The ledger is already filed. She picked up the cup, she walked toward the door. I stopped writing. I looked at the ceiling for 7 seconds, I counted, and then I wrote in my log, I think I understand what that means. I will understand it completely in approximately 4 hours. I was wrong about the 4 hours, it took closer to 6, but I was right about the understanding. 6 hours before the session. Relay Corridor 9 runs beneath the Accord Ring in a straight east-west line, low-ceilinged and lit in the standard transit frequency amberwarm, which is what the rest of the compact uses when it is not trying to make someone feel small. The corridor smells of recycled air and cable insulation, and on this particular morning, the cereal bar that Dr. Pell Arunsova was eating while reading footnotes on his tablet. Pell was humanities infrastructure law specialist. He had been reading Article 19 footnotes in various locations for 11 years, which was approximately how long he had been part of this team, and he had the slightly glazed focus of a person who has been deep in the same document for so long that the document has started to feel like a place he lives. Commander Ren Adosi was holding a thermos in both hands. She had not opened it. Tamaz Rekin Communications was running transmission confirmations on a folding board with his left hand while his right knee moved in a small rhythmic tap that had no connection to anything happening in the room. Sable had never asked him to stop. She had stopped noticing it sometime around year 4. Dr. Narakasalen, Coalition Architecture, was already at her station. She had been there since 4:30. Sable had checked the door log and not commented on this. And Davin Os, Archivist Liaison, the one who had spent 11 years manually checking every Orenic maintenance non-filing against the Article 19 accumulation table, 1 quarter at a time, was standing at the far end of the corridor with his arms crossed, looking at nothing in particular, with the expression of a person who has been ready for a long time and is simply waiting for the world to catch up. Sable came in from the east entry, took off her jacket, hung it on the wall bracket, and took the small thermos from the jacket's inner pocket. She poured tea into a tin cup dented on the lower left for reasons she had never explained and nobody had ever asked about. She held the cup in both hands and looked around the room. Status, she said. Tamaz said the coalition transmissions were queued and ready to send on her word. Nara said the document was complete, had been complete for 3 years, they were just waiting to file it. Davin said the cross-reference table was complete, had been complete for 3 years as well. Pell folded the cereal bar wrapper precisely into thirds and put it in his jacket pocket. He said Article 19 was going to hold. He said it the way someone says a thing they have checked so many times that the checking has become a kind of ritual rather than a genuine question. Sable nodded. She drank her tea. 27 years of work, she said. The last 6 hours are the easy part. To understand what was about to happen in that corridor, and then in Tier 7, you need to understand what happened 27 years before it. I know this because I was there for that too. I am an archivist. I am always there. The Havath Station supply denial occurred in 2381, which the Compact's official record classifies as an administrative irregularity. I want you to hold that phrase in mind, administrative irregularity, for the rest of this account, because it is going to mean something different by the time we reach the end. The Havath system sits in the outer rim of compact transit space. The Havath are a pastoral species, agricultural, processing-focused, not a military culture. Their main station housed 19,000 people at the time, workers, processing staff, families, children. The station ran on compact transit authorization for resupply, food, medical, fuel. Without that authorization, supply ships couldn't dock under compact protocol. In 2381, the Orenic Directorate reclassified the Havath Transit Corridor under Administrative Category 7, which required a new authorization application. They did not notify the Havath Station. They did not notify the Compact's humanitarian monitoring body. They followed the reclassification in a subregister that the Havath government would have had no reason to check, because transit corridors had never been reclassified without notification before. The resupply ships kept coming, they couldn't dock. The Havath government filed an emergency petition with the Compact. Emergency petitions required 9 member species co-signatures to trigger automatic review. 8 species signed immediately. The 9th, the Orenic Directorate, withheld its signature on procedural grounds, citing incomplete application documentation. The documentation they cited was for the same reclassification they had filed without notification. 14 weeks. I want to say that number slowly. 14 weeks without resupply, for 19,000 people on a station not designed for that kind of shortage. The evacuation order came in week 13, after enough member species noise that the Directorate released the emergency co-signature, but by the time evacuation ships reached full capacity, 1,200 people were gone. The Compact filed the incident under administrative irregularity. Nobody was prosecuted. 6 weeks after the Havath Station evacuation was completed, Humanities Accord Bureau held a closed session and authorized Project Meridian Quiet. I did not know this at the time. I learned it 3 years later when I started reading their filing records and found something that didn't make sense. Her name was Essa Havathvar. She was a processing floor supervisor, 41 years old, with 3 children who were not on the station when the resupply stopped because they were at school on the home planet. She had stayed behind to help manage the rationing. Her name appears in the Havath government's casualty record under week 12. I put her name here because the Compact's record doesn't. The Compact's record says 1,200 and then moves on. I am an archivist, I do not move on. In year 3 of my observation post at Threshold Post 4, I was doing what I always do, reading filing records. Not because anyone asked me to, because incomplete records bother me in the way a missing tooth bothers a tongue, you keep going back to the gap. The Compact's Infrastructure Maintenance Registry lists 214 relay nodes across the settled systems. These nodes run the Transit Authorization Network, the same network the Havath Station needed, the same network every Compact member relies on to move ships. The registry requires each member species to file a maintenance report every quarter for any node in their designated zone. It is the least glamorous document in the Compact's procedural library. I am not sure most delegates know it exists. In year 3 of my post, I noticed something. No Orenic maintenance reports, no quarterly filing, no record of anyone checking. The Orenic Directorate's last maintenance filing was dated 2381, the same year as the Havath Station incident. After that, nothing. Just blank entries every quarter for every Orenic designated node, running forward from 2381 to the present. The subregistry had not been audited since 2376. The gap ran the length of a civilization, and nobody was looking at it. I flagged it as anomalous in my own records. I noted it as a potential compliance issue. I did not connect it to humanity. It did not occur to me at that point that anyone would deliberately fill a gap like that. The Orenic Directorate had stopped filing because it considered maintenance work beneath its administrative dignity. I assumed everyone else had simply done the same. I was wrong. Because while the Orenic entries were blank, the entries for humanities designated nodes were not. Every quarter, every node. A filing, clean format, correct procedural code, stamped with 7 maintenance C for 27 years. 1,404 filings in total, each one so procedurally unremarkable that no Orenic administrator had ever looked at them twice. The subregistry had not been audited since 2376. That was the point. I want to tell you about Project Meridian Quiet. Not what it was, you will understand that soon enough, but what it felt like to read about it, 6 years after I first noticed the maintenance ledger gap. I was at my archive station at Threshold Post 4. It was 200. I had been reading Humanities Compact filing record for 3 months, not because I was asked to, because I am an archivist and a record with that many procedurally unremarkable filings is either very boring or very interesting, and I had started to suspect which one. I was reading Article 19 of the Compact's founding accord, specifically the Provisional Infrastructure Stewardship Clause. It was written by Orenic legal architects in the early years of the Compact as an incentive for maintenance participation. The logic was, if a member species performs consistent, documented infrastructure maintenance over a sufficient period, they accrue provisional stewardship rights over that infrastructure. Transit authorization for those nodes runs through the provisional steward pending compact review. The activation threshold was 100 consecutive compliant quarterly filings. The clause was written by people who were certain no species would ever be consistent enough to activate it. I read it twice. Then I looked back at the maintenance ledger. Humanity had 1,404 filings. The activation threshold was 100. They had crossed it in year 26 of a 27-year project. And I sat there at 200 in a quiet archive station and I thought, someone knew this clause was here. Someone read the founding accord and found a clause that no one had ever used, that existed in the most boring corner of the most boring subregistry in the Compact's procedural library, and they decided to use it. Every quarter, for 27 years, not because anyone was watching, not because anyone would have noticed if they stopped, because they decided to be the kind of civilization that shows up. I stopped writing, I stared at the ceiling. Then I opened a transmission channel to 8 species. The 9 of us, the Suri remnant and 8 others, hold observer status in the Compact. We attend sessions. We do not vote. We have no ships in Compact space, no formal procedural standing, and in the case of 5 of the species I contacted, no record in any Compact vote history at all. We are the kind of species the Compact has never needed to learn the names of. That was the Directorate's last filing error. What we do have, what every observer species has under Article 6 Observation, clause the Orenic Directorate authored specifically to ensure non-member witnesses couldn't interfere with Compact proceedings, is independent witness standing. Our acknowledgement of documentary evidence, filed simultaneously with the evidence itself, makes that evidence uncontestable under Compact procedural law. You cannot call our testimony partisan because we have no party. You cannot dismiss it as self-interested because we have nothing to gain. We are just the ones who are watching. I sent the archive summary to 8 species at 3:17. No Suri fleet, no Oran pastoral fleet. No Vethali remnant ships, no Kethani warships. By 900, 6 hours later, all 8 had responded. Their acknowledgement was the first lock. Back in Relay Corridor 9, at roughly the same time the last coalition response came in, Davin Oss was printing the final confirmation copy of the cross-reference table. Not because the digital record wasn't sufficient, because he had spent 11 years building that table and he wanted one paper copy, and Sable had not told him he couldn't have one. Pell had moved from Article 19 footnotes to the cover page of the 4,800-page document. The cover page was one sentence. He read it quietly to himself, the way someone reads a thing they have checked 40 times because checking it has become the point. Commander Adosi had opened her thermos. Tamaz was still at his station, but the knee had stopped. He was watching the coalition acknowledgement confirmations come in one by one on his board, and each time one arrived, he read the species name aloud, not loudly, not for any particular audience, just in the low voice of someone marking something that matters. Suri remnant acknowledged. Oran pastoral acknowledged. Vethali remnant acknowledged. Sable was sitting on the corridor bench with her tin cup, which had gone from hot to warm to merely not cold over the course of the morning. She was reading something on a folding tablet she had not mentioned to anyone. When the 8th confirmation came in, she closed the tablet. She looked at Tamaz. "How long until the session opens?" 40 minutes, he said. She nodded. She finished the last of the tea, still warm for now. She stood up and put her jacket back on. "Send the document," she said. The 4,800-page stewardship claim document transmitted simultaneously to all 61 compact member species and all 9 coalition witnesses at 9:21, 43 minutes before session 1847 opened. It contained every single quarterly maintenance filing humanity had submitted over 27 years, cross-referenced against Article 19 in a format that made the accumulation mathematically plain. It contained the Orenic maintenance non-filing record from 2381 forward. It contained Davin Oss's 11-year cross-reference table. It contained 3 separate legal analyses of Article 19's activation mechanics, each one authored by a different compact registered infrastructure law specialist, each one reaching the same conclusion. The cover page was one sentence. The following constitutes 27 years of stewardship exercise under Article 19 of the Founding Accord of the Settled Compact, filed as active claim. In the session chamber, Kroon Vethsalar was preparing to read the expulsion resolution. His rank sash had been pressed. His 31 seals caught the cool spectrum light. He had reserved space for the 32nd. His session panel received a filing notification at 9:21. He did not read it immediately. There are always filing notifications during an active session. He had a resolution to deliver. He delivered it. And then, in the observer gallery 11 rows above the floor platform, I watched Sable Orenvoss set down her tin cup on the edge of the depressed platform, straighten her collar, look up at 1,944 faces and say 4 words. The ledger is already filed. She picked up the cup, she walked toward the door. I stopped writing, I stared at the ceiling, I wrote what I wrote. 40 minutes later, when the session broke for a procedural recess, I pulled up the infrastructure registry on my archive tablet. I looked at the maintenance ledger for the first time since the session began. The gap was still there, blank Orenic entries running from 2381 to today, sitting beside 1,404 human filings in a neat column of procedural compliance. The gap was still there. And I thought, that is not a gap anymore. Someone just pointed at it in a room with 61 witnesses. In Relay Corridor 9, Kroon Vethsalar's infrastructure aide was opening a notification on a secondary panel, then a second notification, then a third. The aide looked at the source. Read it again. Somewhere beneath the Tier 7 floor, the relay infrastructure was still humming, the same low note I had always been aware of and never once thought to wonder about. I thought about it now. The aide called for Kroon Vethsalar. The 4,800-page document had been sent. The coalition witnesses had acknowledged it. The session had voted 1,944 to 61. And somewhere in Relay Corridor 9, Kroon Vethsalar's infrastructure aide was reading a filing notification for the 3rd time because the 2nd time had not made it make sense. This is what the notification said in plain compact procedural language. Infrastructure Maintenance Registry, Article 19 Activation Notice, Provisional Stewardship Claim Filed, Node Cluster, all 214 designated zones, claimant, Terran Accord Bureau, effective, upon session record. 1 species, 1 filing, 27 years of the same filing. The aide knew what Article 19 was. Every infrastructure law specialist in the compact knew what Article 19 was. What none of them had ever done was look up the activation threshold, because the activation threshold was a number no one had reached. The Orenic architects who wrote the clause had picked 100 consecutive compliant filings as the trigger because 100 seemed like enough. It seemed like more than enough. It seemed, in 2201, when the founding accord was signed, like a number that would function as a permanent ceiling, aspirational, unreachable, present only to signal that the right behavior was in theory possible. Nobody checked the Terran maintenance column. Nobody checked it in year 5 when it had 20 filings. Nobody checked it in year 15 when it had 60. Nobody checked it in year 26 when it crossed 100 and the activation clock started, and the entire infrastructure maintenance registry entered a processing state that had existed in the compact's procedural code since the founding accord and had never once been triggered. The aide called for Vethsalar a 2nd time. In the session chamber, the procedural recess was ending. The session chair, a Pellan delegate named Orvis, who had been chairing compact sessions for 16 years and had never seen anything he could not route through existing protocol, called the assembly back to order. He was aware that something was happening on the infrastructure side of the system. He was not yet aware of what it was. His job at this moment was to close session 1847 with the expulsion resolution formally stamped. He intended to do that. He called for the closing procedural sequence. Kroon Vethsalar was still at the upper tier reading platform. His aide was beside him. The aide had handed him a secondary panel and Vethsalar had read it, and then he had set it down, and then he had picked it up again. He read it for the 2nd time. He set it down again. He reached for his rank sash, a reflex, the fingers checking the seals in order the way they had done in every session for 30 years, 1 through 31, the gap where the 30-second should go. The session chair called his name for the closing stamp. Vetselar did not respond immediately. I noted this in my record. In 27 years of observation, I had seen him pause before speaking exactly once, the day humanity declined to leave after the first expulsion motion in 2394. He had paused for 4 seconds then, checked his legal team, and proceeded. I had wondered at the time what the pause meant. I was starting to understand. Here is what Article 19's activation actually does, and I want to be clear about the mechanics because Vetselar's aide was not yet clear about them, and the session chair was not yet clear about them, and approximately 1,900 of the 1,944 delegates who had just voted for expulsion were not clear about them either. When a species accumulates 100 consecutive compliant filings under Article 19 and formally claims provisional stewardship, the Infrastructure Maintenance Registry does not transfer ownership of the relay nodes. It does not grant military authority. It does not give the claiming species any new ships, any new weapons, any new standing in the compact's governance structure. What it does is this: it suspends transit authorization for all 214 designated node clusters pending provisional steward confirmation. Transit authorization, the permission that ships need, all ships, every ship, regardless of who owns them, to move through compact relay corridors. Pending confirmation. Confirmation that can only be issued by the provisional steward. Pending, in other words, until Sable Orenvoss said otherwise. The Orenic Directorate had a fleet. It was a very good fleet. It was sitting in transit corridors right now, positioned for rapid deployment, because Vetselar had moved it there 6 weeks before this session as a precaution against any disruption following the expulsion vote. The fleet had been a weight in the room all session, unspoken, unnecessary to speak, present in the way that anything large and armed is present when it wants to be. The fleet did not move. Not because anyone stopped it, not because anyone fired on it, not because anyone threatened it or outmaneuvered it. Because the transit authorization had entered a processing state. Because the most effective military force in the settled systems was sitting in relay corridors waiting for a woman with a dented tin cup to confirm their papers. I stopped writing, I stared at the ceiling. Then I started counting, not to 7, the way I had in Phase 1 when I still thought 4 hours would be enough to understand. I got to 9 this time before I picked up my stylus again. I wrote, he has just realized that he has been living in a house and never once checked whose name was on the maintenance record. I wrote it and then I sat with it because I had been in that observer gallery for 27 years, and I had watched the Orenic Directorate build a system that made everyone feel small, and it had never occurred to me, not once in 27 years, that someone had been quietly, methodically, unremarkably paying the upkeep on the house, while the Directorate was busy engraving seals on its rank sash. The gap in the ledger was not a failure of record-keeping. The gap was the argument. What I still did not know was this: did Kroon Vetselar understand why he had no choice? Or did he believe in the way powerful people sometimes believe things that are more comfortable than the truth that he was choosing? I would not have the answer to that in this session. I was not sure I would have it at all. At 1944 to 61, the expulsion resolution had passed. It was in the record. It was stamped. Sable Orenvoss had been formally expelled from the compact, along with every other human delegate, and the expulsion had legal standing, and none of that had changed. Here is what had also not changed. The expulsion resolution said nothing about maintenance filings. It said nothing about Article 19 provisional stewardship. It said nothing about transit authorization. Because why would it? The expulsion resolution was a political instrument, not an infrastructure document, and the people who wrote it had not read the maintenance registry. And the people who read the maintenance registry had not connected it to anything political. And that gap, the gap between political certainty and procedural reality, was the exact gap that 27 years of unremarkable quarterly filings had been quietly measuring. The resolution had passed. The provisional stewardship claim had also been filed. Both were true at the same time. The compact's procedural law did not have a clause that said you could not file an infrastructure claim in the middle of being expelled. It had never needed one. Nobody had ever tried. Sable had not filed it in the middle of being expelled. She had filed it 27 years ago, 1 quarter at a time, and the final filing, the claim document, the formal invocation, had been sent 43 minutes before the session opened, while Kroon Vetselar was pressing his rank sash. The session chair, Orvis, called for a formal point of procedural inquiry. It was the first time in 16 years of chairing sessions that he had called one on himself. In Relay Corridor 9, Tamaz Reckons' knee was still. He was watching the relay status board on his folding panel. The 214 nodes were all showing the same indicator, a small amber marker in the upper right corner of each node entry. The marker had a procedural designation, PVSD hold, provisional stewardship hold, that Tamaz had read about in the Article 19 footnotes approximately 11 years ago and had not expected to see in active use in his lifetime. He looked at it for a long time. Then he said, to no one in particular, "It's actually doing it." Dr. Pel Orensova looked up from his tablet. "Yes," he said. "All 214. Yes. They're all showing PVSD hold." "That's what 1,404 filings gets you," Pel said and went back to reading. Nara Kaselen was at her station, monitoring the document receipt confirmations. All 61 member species had received the 4,800-page claim. All 9 coalition witnesses had confirmed receipt. She was drafting the formal response framework, the terms of the offer, the structure of the review process, the specific procedural language that would let everyone involved save enough face to agree to something without it feeling like a total surrender. She had built the framework 3 years ago. She was just reading it now to make sure it still held. Commander Adosi stood at the corridor door with her thermos, watching the status board. She had built the Relay Network's emergency protocol failsafe, which was the reason she had been on the team for 27 years rather than 6. The failsafe was not being used, it was not needed, but she had wanted to be present when the hold activated, and she was. Sable was in her jacket. She was standing at the corridor's east entry, looking at the door to the session lift. She had not gone back into the chamber after walking out. She had come here instead, and she was waiting, and she had been waiting for approximately 40 minutes, and her tea was cold. The offer was delivered through formal compact channels at 14:23 during the second procedural recess of session 1847. It was not a threat. Sable had been very clear about this in the language, and Nara had built the framework around it, and the distinction mattered. A threat is something you make when you might not follow through. This was a procedural statement of terms. The provisional stewardship hold would remain in effect until the compact entered formal review of the Article 19 claim. In exchange for beginning that review, the following: transit authorization restored full and immediate. The expulsion resolution suspended pending review outcome. The Havath supply denial of 2381 open for formal re-examination, with the 1,200 names entered into the official record. An independent review of the infrastructure maintenance registry to identify all non-filing gaps, with remediation timelines set by the review body, not the directorate. Nobody was being asked to surrender. Nobody was being asked to fire anything, or to stop firing anything, or to move any ships. We will not fire, we will not declare, but we will not leave the maintenance record blank. Vetsular did not respond for 11 minutes. I timed it, I had nothing else to do. I was in the observer gallery and I had my stylus and my log, and I had been waiting a long time for the 11 minutes that came after 27 years, and I was going to record every second of it. At minute 4, his aide passed him something on the secondary panel. He read it, he passed it back. At minute 7, he reached for his rank sash again, 1 through 31, the gap. At minute 9, a junior Orenic delegate in row 3 leaned toward him and said something. Vetsular did not respond. He was looking at the floor platform where Sable had been standing, where the tin cup had been set down, where she had straightened her collar and said 4 words and walked away. He accepted the terms at minute 11. He did not announce it publicly in the chamber. He filed it through the same procedural channels the offer had come through, a formal acknowledgement logged in the compact's administrative record, timestamp 1434. The session chair received it. The session chair read it. He called for order, read the acknowledgement into the open record, and declared session 1847 in procedural hold pending review. Somewhere below the Tier 7 floor, the relay infrastructure hum continued, steady, unbroken, exactly as it had been for 27 years, because someone had been maintaining it. Threshvel noted it as fact in her record. Then she put her stylus down and looked at her hands for a moment, the way you look at your hands when something you spent a long time on has just finished. The emergency compact session was called within 48 hours. Expulsion resolution suspended. Infrastructure maintenance registry review opened, with the Suri remnant, specifically one archivist of the Suri remnant, observer post 4, row 11 of the gallery, appointed lead archivist for the independent review. First non-member species archivist to hold that role in compact history. I noted this in my record without comment because I am an archivist and I do not editorialize. The review would take 2 years, I knew that going in. Vetsular knew it too. His transit authorization had been restored at 14:35, 1 minute after his acceptance. It was immediate, as promised. The fleet moved. His filing authority over the relay network was suspended for the duration of the stewardship review. which humanity could, under Article 19, extend by refiling every quarter indefinitely, as long as they continued to meet the maintenance standard they had already demonstrated for 27 years. He kept his rank sash, he kept his title, he kept the 31 seals, each one representing a species successfully expelled from the compact, and he kept the blank space where the 32nd would have gone. He would keep that space for the rest of his term, and every time he looked at it, he would be looking at the seal he wrote himself without knowing it, the infrastructure clause of the founding accord, the maintenance requirement, the 27 years of quarterly filings in the subregistry nobody audited. He was not removed, he was not shamed in open session. He was simply, procedurally, no longer the one who decided. I did not know if he understood that. I wrote the question in my record and left it there. On the second day of the emergency session, Tamaz Rekin stood at the floor platform, the same depressed platform, 9 meters below the lowest delegate row, in the coolstone chamber with the cool spectrum lights and the footsteps that echoed upward through 14 tiers, and he read 1,200 names into the official record. The names of the people who had died in the Havath supply denial of 2381. He had the list from the Havath government. He read them in the order they appeared in the casualty record: first name, family designation, sector assignment. He read them without introduction and without comment, because the names did not need an introduction and the record did not need a comment. His voice changed around the 300th name, not breaking, just flatter, the professional register worn thin by repetition, by the weight of names going in as sounds and coming out as people. By the 600th name, he was reading the way you read when reading is all that's left to do. By the 900th, the chamber was very quiet. Nobody had asked the 6-member species delegates to stay for this part of the session. They stayed. 6 of them. Seated in their rows, some in species whose names I had not known 3 years ago. Some in species whose observer status petitions were already being drafted in the back offices of the Accord Ring, all of them present for 47 minutes while Tamaz read names that the Compact's official record had called an administrative irregularity for 27 years. Kroon Vetselar was present for all 47 minutes. He did not speak. I recorded this as fact. I did not add anything to it because there was nothing to add. When the session closed, Davan Oss went immediately to his archive station and started drafting the petition schedule. He had been waiting to do that for 3 years. He looked like a person who had found their natural habitat. Nara Castellan was already on a call with the review committee, walking through the framework she had built and refined and checked for 3 years, and she was talking the way people talk when they have been waiting to say a thing for a very long time and the time has finally come. Pell was reading, he was always reading. Commander Adosi had gone to the relay station to run a full diagnostic on the 214 nodes, not because anything was wrong, but because she was the kind of person who checked her work after a job was done, and she wanted the diagnostic to show clean, and she was fairly sure it would. 6 of the 9 observer species had filed formal compact membership petitions by evening. The Havath incident was formally reclassified. I had a desk in the review committee's office. I went back to the observer gallery instead. I wanted to sit in row 11 for a few minutes. I had been sitting there for 27 years and I thought it deserved a proper goodbye. The chamber was empty. The coolstone floor was quiet. The cool spectrum lights ran their usual frequency, making the empty delegate rows look flat and gray in the way they always did when there was no one in them. I sat in row 11 and I looked at the floor platform and I thought about Essa Havathvar, processing floor supervisor, 41 years old, 3 children not on the station. I wrote her name in my log again. Then I went to find Sable. She was in relay corridor 9. The team was gone, Davan to his drafts, Nara to her call, Tamaz to the nearest food station, Ren to her diagnostic. The corridor was empty except for Sable, who was sitting on the bench along the west wall with her jacket on and her tin cup in her hands. The cup was dented on the lower left. I had noted this detail in my record many times over the years, always with the same notation, no explanation given. I had never asked. I asked now. She looked at the cup, she thought about it. I was 34, she said. I threw it at a wall the day the Havath petition was declined. It bounced back. She looked at the dent. I kept it because I thought I should have to look at it every day until we finished. I wrote this down. I asked her what Meridian Quiet had been built to achieve. She was quiet for a moment. The corridor hummed around us, the relay infrastructure still running, exactly as it had been running since before either of us was watching. I wanted them to have to use the system they built, she said. Not to fight it, not to leave it, to use it the exact way they wrote it and have it work for someone else instead. I wrote that at the top of the next blank page in my record, not at the end of this account, at the top of the next one. The tea was cold. She drank it anyway because that was the kind of person the work required.